Please welcome Margaret Jolly.
Thank you. Thank you, John. I'm actually going to talk about something really personal tonight, which is how to manage your own personal stress response. So the irony of me standing here tonight talking to you about the stress response is that I feel a bit like there's a lion right behind me because my anticipatory anxiety has now been replaced by performance anxiety. But the lion that's standing behind me is a decrepit, toothless lion because I've been practicing what I preach. So I need to tell you a little bit of background about the title to this presentation. So I originally qualified as a lawyer. I know how hideous. Apologies to any lawyers in the room. Too many years ago to remember, but I've had a very successful career working in HR and people development in law firms, which I occasionally describe as rounding up cats. The legal profession suffers very, very high levels of stress and mental health problems, almost twice that of the general population. And there are lots of reasons for that, which I won't go into tonight, but I do have enough material for a whole conference. We moved over the year from talking about stress management into time management, the idea being that if you measure your day in 6-minute units, if you manage your time, surely you must be able to manage your stress. And then we started talking about resilience. I'm not quite sure how the symbol of a little plant coming through the rocks came to depict resilience, but that tends to be the picture most people think of when we talk about resilience. So stress and time management was still part of the language around resilience, but not much changed. Perhaps we were giving in to an extent in acknowledging that the profession was very stressful and that we needed to teach people how to cope with the stress and bounce back rather than dealing with the structural and hierarchical issues that were causing the stress. So I was one of the people that was teaching resilience, and I considered myself to be a very resilient person. I bounced back, I pushed on, I didn't say no to a single social engagement, and I was the living embodiment of if you want a job done, give it to a busy person. But inevitably, this very resilient person had a personal crisis, and I found myself running on empty, having constant tension and migraine headaches, not sleeping well, not eating properly. And I thought, who am I to be teaching resilience to these young graduates who are being told you're entering a profession where you're twice as likely to suffer a mental health issue than the rest of the world. So this small crisis led me down a path of discovery. I did what I do best, and I researched it, and I researched the concept of stress itself, not managing stress, but what happens to our bodies and brains when we are facing stress. And my light bulb moment came. It's not about stress management, it's not about time management, it's about managing our actual physical response to stress. And my research led me to this lovely man, and I know he looks like the Nutty Professor, but he is all kinds of awesome. And I could finish my talk now and just show you the 6-minute YouTube video that he has called Stress Saviour to Killer. And I've got the American spelling up there just to make it easier for you if you Google it. I know there's a U missing, but that's how the Americans spell it. So what I'm about to tell you is not original, it's based on his research. He has been researching stress in human beings for nearly 40 years, and every couple of years he travels to Africa to study stress in the animal world. And what he discovered, and in fact he's written a book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, is that in Africa, zebras spend most of their time drinking at waterholes, eating, mating and sleeping, and they are pretty relaxed most of the time. But for about 1 to 2 minutes, they experience sheer terror. A lion appears and picks a potential meal out of the herd, and the chase is on. So the response of the zebras is an automatic one. They don't think about it. Their brains sense danger, and sometimes they don't even see it themselves. If another zebra cuts and runs, the rest of the herd follows. They might not see the lion, they just run as fast as they can. Their hearts are racing and their bodies are automatically responding to the threat. So they're either eaten or they survive. But if they survive, they just go back to what they were doing before, which is drinking at waterholes, eating, mating and sleeping. The immediate danger is over and their bodies go back to that relaxed state. Baboons, on the other hand, only need 3 hours a day to get their calorie intake, and leaving aside sleep, they've got about 9 hours a day to torment each other and make each other miserable. So they're not being stressed by something trying to eat them. They're being stressed by each other and by psychosocial things. So it's no surprise that baboons are closest in their genetic makeup to human beings. So zebras would be astounded to know that we human beings experience the stress response as frequently as we do for things that are not going to kill us, and sometimes as a constant companion. In human being world, our stress response is very similar to that of the animal world, and our brains and bodies are hardwired from Neanderthal times to respond to threats and perceived threats. And I use that word perceived deliberately because our learned response to certain stressful situations becomes a habit, and our stress response is activated. They're memories that are activated by a stressful situation or even the thought of that situation. So if you've had a stressful experience doing something and your stress response was activated and that experience is going to be repeated, the thought of doing that will activate your stress response. So the threats that our brains are perceiving are not going to kill us. There's no line behind us. We're responding in the same way as if every day something is trying to kill us. And in doing so, ironically, we may potentially be going to kill ourselves because of the ongoing stress that we're causing our body. So when we're facing stress, our bodies respond automatically by activating the nervous system and releasing the stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol. And these cause physical changes which help us react quickly, and it's sometimes called the fight or flight response, which you're all familiar with. Some psychologists and psychiatrists now add freeze because sometimes people's muscle tension is so tight they can't actually move. So the physical reactions include increased heart rate, sweating, faster and shallower breathing, increased blood pressure, increased metabolic rate, which explains why I was really thin when I was stressed. So I'm clearly quite relaxed now. Increased muscle tension. Stored glucose in the liver is released to give us more energy. The immune system is suppressed and the need to digest food and waste disappears. So if you think about that, there's lots of physical reactions that are happening all the time if we're in a constant state of stress that are happening to our bodies. So this is the brain's way of activating the things that we need to do in that moment and stopping things that it doesn't need to do right away. And in dangerous situations, these occur without conscious control. So for example, if a car cuts in front of us in the traffic, without even thinking about it, we're hitting the brakes or swerving to avoid an accident. We're not, in that split second, our brain has activated the stress response and made us act. What should happen when we don't have an accident is that we return to a relaxed state. But if we're not in a relaxed state to start with, we will put our hand on the horn, clench our fists, flip someone the bird, follow someone down the highway for 10 kilometres, and some people will then take a baseball bat out of the car and beat the crap out of someone. But I suspect there are some personality disorders involved in that. So while the stress response is helpful in the short term in those emergency situations, it's not helpful if we're in that state all the time, because we're in a constant state of alert and the slightest little thing will tip us over the edge. And the most frightening thing about it for me is how easily we become accustomed to it, how easily it can creep up on us that stress response is being activated all the time. I don't know if any of you ever go on holidays and get a really bad headache on like day 1 or 2 of the holiday. And that's actually a reaction. It's called a stress letdown headache, that all of a sudden the adrenaline and cortisol in your body, the stress response is deactivated and your body can't cope because it's so used to those hormones going through the body all the time. So our brain is the major driver of our behaviour, and for our ancestors, failure could mean the difference between life and death. So drought, lack of food, a crop failing, that could actually kill you. And failure is drummed into us from school days, or sometimes even earlier now at kindergarten. So the type of threats, though, that we face today, even though our brain responds in a similar way, are very different. So failure at a job might be perceived as a threat to status or livelihood. And the interesting thing about the stress response is it doesn't wait for it to actually happen. it happens when we think about those things. So public speaking is actually a really good example of that if someone has a bad experience public speaking, they then fear that happening again, and they tend to avoid that situation, or they talk themselves into repeating it. So we need to retrain our brains to respond differently. So remember what the automatic response is. Rapid shallow breathing, sweating, increased heart rate, metabolic rate, blood pressure, muscle tension, our liver function and digestive function slow down. Now, of all the things that happen automatically, pretty much the only thing we can consciously control is our breathing. And all the other things happen automatically as well, but it's by controlling our breathing we can trick our brain into deactivating the stress response. So consciously slowing down the breathing in turn slows down the heart rate, which then sends a message back to the brain, and all this happens, in a very short space of time. So the message goes back to the brain that whatever threat is being perceived is diminishing. So the brain will then send a message to the pituitary gland to slow down the release of the cortisol and adrenaline, and the threat response diminishes. So even just slowing down the breathing with one exercise will make that happen. So now I'm going to get everyone to do it. So everyone's going to close their eyes. Not right now. I'm going to tell you what we're going to do. We're going to put one hand on the chest and one hand on the diaphragm. I'm going to ask everyone to close their eyes and take one long, slow, deep breath in. I'm going to ask you to hold it for a count of 3, and then I'm going to ask you to breathe out really loudly, like at the end. So everyone's going to feel like they're a dill, but it doesn't matter because no one's going to be watching, except maybe me. So everyone close your eyes, one hand on your chest, one hand on your diaphragm. So when you take the deep breath in, I want you to feel the hand on your diaphragm move. So we're not doing the high, shallow breathing. So everyone, close your eyes. Take a very deep, slow breath in. Hold, 2, 3, and... Now, did anyone notice something that physically happened on that out-breath? What happened to your shoulders? Yeah, your shoulders actually, I call it unhinging from your earlobe. So that muscle tension that is automatically there because the stress response is activated is reduced slightly. So holding the breath will slow down the heart rate, and if you do that a number of times during the course of the day, you will reduce your stress response. So with managing the stress response, that's a really high level, very simple explanation of it. I recommend people do that exercise 10 times a day, and if you do that 10 times a day, that's 2 minutes out of your entire day. You can pause between activities, so if you get off the phone from someone or finish one task, close your eyes, take a deep breath, let it out, move on to the next thing. The other thing is that if you recognise something that is a trigger for the stress response, when you feel that sweaty palms, the heart racing, stop, just close your eyes, take a deep breath, let it go, and deal with the issue. So for me, it's overwhelm. I sometimes look at my diary and I start to feel stressed looking at what's coming up in the week, and I know I just have to take some things out. And no one's going to die. There's no lion going to come and eat me. No one's going to be offended if I say, I can't do lunch this week, can we do next week? So there are lots of ways you can proactively do things to reduce that stress response. So I would ask you to think about this. Our minds can change our behaviour changes our outcomes, but by changing our breathing, we can actually trick our brain into reducing the stress response on an everyday basis. And finally, think like a zebra. There are no lions in your life. No lion is going to come and eat you. Actively manage your stress response, and the good thing about that is when you start to realise how you can manage it yourselves, you can see it in other people and help them manage their stress response as well. So thank you very much for listening.